afternoon to those of you in the room with us and to those of you watching us live on YouTube. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Tony Blair, Executive Chairman of the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change and former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and Ms. Armida Salcia Alice Jabana, Under Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of ESCAP. My name is Tra Tirak Alsan. I'm a TV news anchor for NHK World and the National Broadcasting Services of Thailand. It is my privilege and honor to moderate this conversation with Mr. Tony Blair, which will be focusing on policy leadership in the age of digitally driven innovation. May I now invite Ms. Armida Salcia Alice Jabana, Under Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of ESCAP, to deliver her opening statement.
Mr. Tony Blair, Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, friends, it is my pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to Mr. Tony Blair, a distinguished statesman, author, and global leader. He needs no introduction, but if I may highlight, in his current capacity, Mr. Tony Blair is the Executive Chairman of the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, a not-for-profit organization which is working with leaders around the world to build more open, inclusive, and prosperous countries. The Institute is driving innovation and change and unlocking the power of technology across its work on policy, strategy, and delivery. This very much resonates with ESCAP's work and priorities, in which we are supporting countries in the region to accelerate inclusive, resilient, and sustainable development. We are promoting initiatives that demonstrate how Asia-Pacific as a hub of digitally driven innovation can embrace digital solutions for inclusive and sustainable development. No sector is left untouched as digital innovations transform entire economies and all societies across our region, contributing to alleviating poverty, expanding markets, empowering women entrepreneurs, as well as vulnerable groups such as older persons and persons with disabilities. Furthermore, as the most disaster-impacted region of the world, and with climate change the most defining challenges of our time, the increased convergence in digital and space-derived products and services is enhancing early warning systems. Through these innovations, ever more accurate early warning information is reaching the right people at the right time, leaving no one behind. Excellencies and distinguished guests and colleagues, as our region faces economic, environmental, and social risk of unseen complexity and uncertainty, we stand at a critical juncture to deliver on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Government policy leadership assumes urgency. Earlier this month, at the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on Digital Inclusion and Transformation, co-organized with the government of Kazakhstan, member states adopted the Astana Ministerial Declaration. The declaration serves as a regional blueprint for coordinated policy actions to promote digital infrastructure connectivity, digital solutions, digital trust, with responsible management of digital data. In this regard, I would like to extend my deep appreciation to Mr. Tony Blair and the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change for the productive partnership with the ESCAP Secretariat. I thank you for the compelling messages that you delivered at the 80th session of the Commission in April of this year, as well as your Institute's highly relevant contribution to the Commission's SIM study and to the Asia-Pacific Digital Transformation Report presented at the Astana Minister Conference. I look forward to strengthening this collaboration further. I also look forward to Mr. Blair's valuable insight and advice on how policy leadership can effectively seize the opportunity of digitally driven innovation to advance sustainable development in our region and beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Alice Jabana, and may I now invite Mr. Tony Blair to join me for our conversation. Thank you so much for being here with us. We're delighted to have you.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. That's a real pleasure to be with you here today. And please, my thanks to the Undersecretary General, to Armida for a kind welcome. And yeah, it's, you know, you have to forgive me a little bit because I literally flew in overnight from the UK. This time yesterday, I was having breakfast with my grandchildren in the countryside of Oxfordshire. So it's, if I misstep occasionally during the interview, you just have to forgive me, okay?
That's fine. Let's begin our conversation by talking first about the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, or TBI. Now, you've established the Institute to drive tech-enabled change, and you've expanded your global reach to over 40 countries. Given that Southeast Asia is a very diverse region with different political systems as well as varying economic developments, can you tell us about the work that your institute does in the region?
Yeah, so I founded the Institute really based on my 10 years or more experiences as British Prime Minister. But then also when I started to work with governments after leaving office, based on my experience with those governments as well. And here's the thing that I have discovered, which is that even though countries are completely different from each other, and they have different circumstances, different resources, different opportunities, different sized populations, some of the processes of government and the challenges of governing are the same, no matter what your size or what your position. And, you know, in any other walk of life, where people were engaged in important jobs over a long period of time, there would be a whole science around, you know, what works, what doesn't work, what should you do, what are the lessons, you know, how do you do it better? You know, even, you know, you can read more books on how to be a good football coach than you can on how to be a good leader, which is one reason why I wrote the book I've just written. But the point is, so I started the Institute really to see how I could help other leaders at the beginning of their journey of leadership to learn some of the lessons that I had learned from governing, but also from watching others govern. And it really, you know, as I say, my conclusion was in the end, it's pretty much the same. Whether you're the president of Sierra Leone or the president of the United States of America. So when we come to this region, my institute is working presently in Indonesia, in Vietnam, in the Philippines, in Timor-Leste. And, you know, we work on a variety of different things in each country. So in Indonesia, it's about how it attains a higher income status for its people and drives through a reform program. In Vietnam, it's about attracting foreign investment. In the Philippines, it's about various different things, including digitization. But in all of the countries, it's the same principles. It's how do you govern effectively and how do you drive change? Because the other thing that I discovered as Prime Minister of a developed country, you know, when I first came to power a long time ago now, and, you know, we won a big victory in the election. So I used to sit in the cabinet room in number 10 Downing Street and think, I must be the most powerful person in the country, right? Because I'm prime minister and I've won this big majority. So if I sit in the prime minister's chair and I say, here's a decision, something should happen. And after a time, I discovered nothing happened. The decision would just disappear. And therefore, over time, I realized the decision was the start, not the end. The end was delivering the decision. And delivering the decision, the implementation, was what was really tough. So this is what we now focus on. In my second term in government, we introduced something called a delivery unit. We changed the way that government worked. And, you know, it's been developing ever since.
So helping countries to deliver.
Yeah, that's because it's, in the end, you see, a lot of politics today is still, especially in the West, marked by ideology. You know, we have traditional left-right perspectives in the West, which have a long history, mainly born out of the Industrial Revolution. But actually, most places you go in the world, they don't really think of it in that way. It's all about, can you improve the lives of the people, right? Can you educate people better? Can you give them better healthcare? Can you get rid of corruption? Can you bring about a decent environment for business? And here's the really interesting thing. Someone somewhere in the world has your problem and is solving it. So this is why, you know, I say to people, in a rational world, you'd be saying, okay, let's learn the lessons. But this is government, so it's not always rational.
Now, what kinds of progress have countries been able to make so far with your help?
I like to think that everything we do is measured in very specific outcomes. So it might be reducing the poverty or reducing, for example, maternal mortality or child mortality. It's very often now about attracting higher degrees of investment. Now we work a lot on connectivity. How do you make sure that countries, because today, if you're not connected, if you're not able to engage with the world through internet connectivity, then you'll never progress. So a lot of the work we do now is around power generation, internet connectivity, digitization. And in each case, you know, we should be able to show, because we always, when we work in a country, we have very specific outputs. And I always say to my teams, you know, what we're about, of course, the process matters, but the process for me is not a result. The result is the improvement. It could be in a public service, it could be in a piece of infrastructure, it could be in the living standards of the people.
And what would you like to see more of, as well as what still has room for improvement?
Well, I think everything has room for improvement. So it's a long list. But I think today I think there are some very basic things that countries need to succeed. And, you know, it's just, in a way, although the world is a very complicated place, I think in terms of what people need to succeed, it's quite simple. And here's a very interesting thing. You can take two countries living side by side with the same potential and the same opportunity. One succeeds, one fails. And you will always be able to identify the decisions that allow the country to succeed. And if you look at any country today, if you take the countries in this region, you can see the decisions that people took that enabled the country to make progress. So if you take China or Vietnam, once they started to open up, their income went up. If you take Singapore, it's a set of very clear decisions that were made that allowed the country to progress. Over these past years in Indonesia, for example, under President Jokowi, there's been a series of reforms, and you can literally see the benefit as a result of that. So I think it's you know, today I would say infrastructure, but including digital infrastructure, is key. I think predictable business rules, the absence of corruption, if businesses have got to know that they succeed or fail on their own merits, that it's not about who you know or, where you can try and enter into the system and get round and do what you want to do without providing a proper justification for it. It should be about the quality of what you're offering. And then I think in terms of the public services, in education and healthcare, it's very clear now that you can make progress through reforms, but those reforms have got to be reforms from the point of view of the patient and the student, and not simply for the interests of those running the system.
Now, you've recently published a book, Leadership Lessons for the 21st Century, which I got a chance to read, and I actually found it, surprisingly, a lot of funny anecdotes. But also, it's relatable not just for world leaders, but for leaders in general as well. That's what I found. Now, as
Thank you. I think we'll put that up on the. I'll send that to the publisher, right?
Now, as the longest continuously serving Labour Prime Minister who has led Britain for 10 years, what did you wish that you had known before you started your tenure?
A lot, a lot of things. But no, I did. I wanted to write the book so that someone might actually read it. Because you write a book about politics or government. I mean, I have to tell you, I'm in the Sunday Times bestseller list. I'm apparently number 2. But the one in front of me, without offending anyone, is Gillian Anderson's female erotica. So I reckon if I'm number 2 to that, I'm doing quite well, right? And I could have written a book that was twice as heavy and 4 times as boring, but I decided to write a book, as I say, that someone might actually want to read. And you're absolutely right, by the way. The lessons in leadership are actually the same, whether you're leading a country, a company, a community center, or a football team. And what would I have liked to have learned? Well, I have one part in the book where I came over time to call the 4 Ps, which is number 1, prioritization. If you try to do everything, you end up doing nothing. And it's hard to prioritize, because if you're a leader of a country or you're a leader of an organization, everything's important, right? You can't say something's not important. But you as a leader should define those priorities that are going to define whether you really succeed or fail. Okay, so that's the first one. The second is policy. And I think policy is fascinating, because I often talk to leaders and I'll say to them, tell me what your policies are. And they'll list a whole lot of things. And I say to them, those aren't really policies, they're just ambitions, right? Reducing poverty is not a policy. It's just an ambition. The policy is how you do it. And that's really difficult. And one of the things I think people often misunderstand about politics is that at one level, it's a very crude business, right? If you're in a democratic system, you're shaking hands, you're kissing babies, you're hoping they don't cry, you're sort of, you're getting around, you're doing all the things. It's crude at that level, right? It's about just pulling in the votes. But when it comes to governing, it's a very intellectual business. What is the right solution to a healthcare system in the 21st century? It's difficult. So policy is the second thing, that you've got to go deep, and you've not got to confuse having an ambition with having a policy. The third thing is a very obvious thing, but it's the most obvious thing in the world. Any of you running an organization will know it is the most obvious thing, and yet we often don't do it properly, which is people, right? I mean, when we say it's all about the people, it really is all about the people. And in government, you've got to put the best people in the best positions. Now, you will often have to, in politics, you'll have to put people in positions because, for example, they represent part of your coalition, because, for example, they represent some interest that you've got to keep on board. but make sure the people in the really important positions that match your priorities are people who can do the job well. And then the fourth P is performance management. And that's the delivery. And, it took me time to realize all of those things, that I couldn't do everything, that the policy, you had to go deep and not shallow, that the people, if you had the wrong person in the plate, you had to get rid of them and put in someone good, and that delivery is tough. So that's, I guess, some of the things there's a whole lot of other things I wish I'd known, but it's...
What are some advice that you can give to our leaders today, whether, in this room as well as elsewhere?
I think it's experience is a great teacher. And, at one point I talk about the 3 stages of leadership, which I have noticed again with all the work that I do with leaders. And the 3 stages are the following. At the first stage, you come into a job you're new, right? And you know nothing. So actually, you're very open to listening and learning. But time passes, you're in the job, you get to know quite a lot, and then you think you know everything and you stop listening. And that's when all the mistakes are made. And then there's the third stage, when you've matured and you know what you know and you know what you don't know and you know the difference, and you're listening again because you realize there are limits. And no one's ever as smart as they think they are. No one's ever as right as they think they are. And I think if I, at any, and a lot of the book is about my mistakes, not my successes, by the way. I think the 2 most important qualities are humility and curiosity. Humility because in the end, you are a fallible human being. And curiosity because in a changing world, you've got to be constantly open to new thinking and new ideas.
Now, to shift our focus a bit, a key mandate of ESCAP is to promote multilateralism. What is the role of multilateralism in ensuring that the new technological revolution benefits everyone, everywhere?
Well, I'm a great believer in this, but I think it's important that it's always practical. So I think there's a lot that countries can do to help other countries not just learn the lessons of their experience, but, for example, where they've got solutions that those countries can benefit from, to be engaged with them. And, I think the multilateralism that I have seen throughout a long, long period of time that works best is when it's focused on specific problems and where countries are coming together, not simply in their own national interest, but are prepared to check that out at the door and work on a common problem together. And ultimately, I do a lot of work, for example, in Africa, where I would say a lot of the multilateral cooperation you need is not actually, as it's often seen, between Africa and the outside world, but actually within Africa itself. You still have a massive amount of trade barriers, of things that hold back, for example, cooperation on energy, moving across frontiers. These are the practical things that I think multilateralism can give you at its best. But it's then you've got the bigger and broader issues, obviously, around things like climate change and global health, where I think one of the things I'm focused a lot on now, because we have a complicated geopolitics, let's say, the split with America, China, and, the West, Russia, and so on. In the Middle East, I obviously see this with Iran and other countries. I think whatever geopolitical challenges there are, always leave a space for cooperation on things that cross frontiers and where it doesn't really matter what side you're on. It's just a basic human issue. And I would put health and climate in that bucket.
Now, to expand more on especially climate, the world is, of course, facing huge challenges when it comes to climate and sustainable development. As much as artificial intelligence, or AI, has the transformational potential to increase productivity and growth, its carbon footprint is also unparalleled at the same time. How can leaders steer the development of twin climate and digital transition towards the triple bottom line, which is the people, planet, and profit?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, the artificial intelligence large language models use a huge amount of electricity. And that's why a lot of the countries that are going to be able to power those models are those with high renewable energy levels, because if we end up just using traditional fossil fuel energy, then we're going to make the situation we've got a lot worse. I mean, as time goes on, there will be the next generation of these large language models are going to require hundreds of billions of dollars worth of investment, and they're going to require enormous amounts of energy. So this is a real challenge. It's a challenge we can meet, by the way, if we want to, because it depends where you put the data centers and what energy you're using to power them. But we're going to have to solve that. And we're going to have to solve it because the benefits potentially of artificial intelligence, I mean, I know there's a lot of downside to it, and we can come to that, but the benefits potentially of generative artificial intelligence, and then in time, artificial general intelligence, it's, we can transform healthcare systems, education systems, the whole way government works. We have a whole project within our institute called the Reimagined State, which is really trying to say, in the 19th century, the state was minimalist. In the 20th century, the state grew enormously and has become the big state. And in the 21st century, as a result of this technology revolution, you can reimagine the state, right? So for example, artificial intelligence should give you the ability, as India's done very effectively with its digital ID, by the way, to be able to make transfer payments to citizens direct. So you can cut out a lot of the corruption with that. You should be able to merge different data lakes of information within government to target help much more effectively. And in things like drug discovery, I mean, there's just going to be a massive number of new drugs that are going to come on the market in the next few years, because drug discovery will be able to be done much, much more effectively and quickly. So you're also then going to have the ability to switch your healthcare system from curing disease to preventing disease. So all of this is going to be possible, which is why it's important to access AI. But you're right, there is a major energy challenge that comes along with it. But in the end, also, technology will play a big role there. I think that there will be a whole new development of nuclear power, done in a much different and better way than before. And then there's a whole set of new technologies coming around things like seeds for agriculture. The world is changing at this moment in time faster than it's changed probably at any point in time in human history.
It's like you mentioned, governments need to harness the opportunity at the same time, but mitigate the risk at the same time. So you said that, for example, India is a country that has done this well. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's basically India's taken a system of digital identity that was beginning prior to the Modi government, actually, but it was then taken and developed into this digital identifier for all citizens. That means you access government services and government payments directly. And, other countries are doing this, by the way, now. But what's interesting about India, I mean, Amina and I were just discussing, a lot of the best innovation in technology comes with very small countries. For example, the most forward country on technology in Europe is probably Estonia, which most people really, but yes, but it's small. Singapore obviously is extraordinary in that regard. The UAE is actually a leader in digital technology today. But the thing about India is it's a very large country, and it's managed to do this one project, which has been, pretty transformative. And I think today, by the way, in any developing country, getting this digital infrastructure right is absolutely essential. And I would say it's true for developed countries as well. But for developed countries, the technology revolution enables us to reform our legacy systems. But in developing countries, it can enable countries to leapfrog those legacy systems altogether. And this is why, with all the presidents and prime ministers we work with around the world, which are over 40 now, I say to them, this is where you need to take time off from the day job and sit and think about, have you got the best partners to build this digital infrastructure? What does it really look like? What are the safeguards you need on privacy? And how do you make sure that you have got good data stored in the cloud, secure, with a digital ID for your citizens? Because this will be just literally foundational to success in the future.
Mm-hmm. Additionally, another important issue is how do governments balance regulation and innovation, especially as the technological landscape rapidly evolves?
Yeah, this is a really tough one. So at the moment, there's probably 3 different types of regulation that are coming into play. The Americans are probably more laissez-faire around regulation, as you might expect. The Europeans are being much tougher, as you might expect. China is very open in some ways, but when it comes to anything touching national security, is quite closed in other ways. I personally think we should try and reach some common understandings, because things like disinformation, AI hallucinations, all of the risks, and by the way, with this technology, it's general purpose technology, right? So it can be used for good and it can be used for bad. So all the stuff to do with bioterrorism and all the rest of it, all of that's going to become more possible with this technology. So I think I tend towards, more in the American direction myself, because I just think you've got to be careful, and the Europeans are going to be super careful of this, that you don't stifle innovation. But the more we can reach agreement on some basic rules, the better. And the reason why I think you've got to have a flexible system of regulation is that this technology is advancing so fast that if you regulate for one moment in time, you may just find, within a few months you're out of date, and then you've got a rigidity that you can't get rid of. But, even the people, I speak and talk a lot to the people who are actually engaged in these technologies like OpenAI and so on. And even they don't know where it's going to be. So if you ask, for example, DeepMind, which is probably one of the best technology companies in the world, which is in the UK, even though it's owned by Google, it does its research and develops its products in the UK. But when I was talking to the guy who started it and runs it a few weeks back, he was telling me, I honestly don't know where this technology will take us. And the artificial generative intelligence, that's when you get to the stage where the machine really is smarter than any human. So how you regulate for that, it's really difficult. And then, by the way, you've got whole other fields which most people don't read about at the moment, like robotics, which I think is going to accelerate dramatically, and where countries like China actually are, really pushing ahead very fast.
Lastly, what about in terms of overcoming bureaucratic inertia when you're trying to implement significant technological reforms?
Yeah, bureaucratic inertia. I suppose there's people who would identify as bureaucrats here. So forgive me, I don't want to be, it's never a good idea to insult your audience, but I think the thing is, this is hard stuff to understand. And I don't think there's any shame in admitting that. You know, I talk a lot about technology, but my children believe that I shouldn't be allowed to. And, you know, there was some time back, I made the mistake of agreeing to speak at a conference on talk about this in the book actually, on a conference on cryptocurrency. So I phoned my eldest son who's in the technology business. I said, explain cryptocurrency to me. So he gave me this explanation. I said to him, I can't understand a word of it. So he then sent me this booklet with the title, The Idiot's Guide to Cryptocurrency. I read this and I'd obviously attained a higher level of stupidity because I still couldn't understand it. And then finally on the morning of the conference, I phone him and say, I'm about to address this conference, what do I say? And he says, tell them you're sick. so
Smart advice.
yeah, so look, therefore, it's unreasonable to expect the bureaucracy to go and handle all of this. It needs outside help. And, you know, if you look, for example, I was talking to the guy who ran the Singapore digital infrastructure until very recently. And a lot of his job was getting in engineers into government, computer scientists and engineers into government. And that's what so bureaucracies always have a capacity for inertia. That's true. But I think it's unreasonable to expect them to better get their heads around the whole of this without at least some outside help. And what you need, I think, is a mix of the specialists and the system.
Mr. Blair, I know you have a whole chapter dedicated to scheduling, that we need to be on a very tight schedule. And unfortunately, we've run out of time for our conversation today, so we have to move on now and take some questions from the floor.
Sure.
Yes, please.
My name is Jung Ham. I'm a former representative and the Deputy Mission Korean Embassy in Bangkok. Mr. Tony Blair, it's my great honor to meet you today. I had the privilege of studying at the London School of Economics during your tenure as a Prime Minister. So this is so particularly meaningful moment for me. Your perspective today was incredibly insightful, especially your points on how digital innovation intersect with urgent global challenges of climate change and sustainability. The recent ESCAP Digital Transformation Report highlights that while digital transformation can drive innovation and efficiency, it also comes with a risk, such as widening the digital divide and exacerbating the environmental challenges. In this regard, Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol recently proposed a digital bill of rights, which seeks to establish global norms around the ethical use of AI and data privacy and reducing the digital divide. So ultimately, tackling these challenges demand a global effort, one where all countries work together to establish shared norms and objectives. At the same time, it is crucial that we adopt region-specific, customized approaches that take into account the unique needs and circumstances of different regions. Mr. Tony Blair, what is your perspective on how we should balance these approaches at both global and regional level to ensure effective digital transformation? And what do you think is the role ESCAP could play in addressing these challenges? Thank you.
I think ESCAP can play a very important role because you've got links across the whole of the region in trying to work out, A, what are the ethical and other questions that need to be answered, and B, to try and reach some form of consensus, because it is obviously better if people aren't operating it with a different framework of rules across a whole lot of different countries. So I think that is very important. The only other thing I'd say, though, is that I think we need to be clear about the ethical questions. And, there are things to do with privacy, which are really important. Though, we have a debate, for example, in the UK around whether we should have a digital ID. And at the moment, neither the government nor the opposition is in favor. I mean, I'm in favor, but they're not. And they're the ones in the job right now. So, but we may get there in time. But I always say to people, because they worry about giving their government this information, and I say to them, how much information do you think you give Amazon or Apple or any of these companies? I mean, you give them masses of information. So I think it's important that when we're analyzing what are the ethical questions, we're very clear about really what are the problems. And I think the problems are to do with the promotion of harmful material, particularly for young people. I think they're to do with disinformation. I think they're to do with these unidentified bots and others, things that can mount campaigns that are really specious and interfere with countries' politics. So let's get right what the ethical issues are, then we've got a better chance of dealing with them. And I think the other thing, which is really important, is how do you make sure that we don't end up in this new world with an even greater level of inequality than before, because some people get access and some people don't. And that's why I think this digital infrastructure, I mean, we should be reshaping development policy around making sure people get access to it, because that is more important, frankly, than a lot of what we spend development dollars on.
Can we take the next question? Go ahead.
Your Excellency, good day. My name is Vitaly Alexandrov. I'm Deputy Permanent Representative of Kazakhstan to ESCAP. A great honor to be here. The government of Kazakhstan has put digital development on high priority policy basis, and we has made rapid progress in developing diverse digital solutions for sustainable development. Kazakhstan is ready to share this solution across the region to all users in interested member states. In this regard, in the Astana Ministerial Declaration has committed to considering further the establishment of a regional digital solution center that has been proposed by the government of Kazakhstan. We see that main problem that all countries face is high barriers and obstacles when implementing projects on bilateral basis. In a number of countries, digital cooperations at the intergovernmental level is actually prohibited. In this this is a matter of national security, trust, and also the understanding that any country will be left far behind without cooperation in the digital sphere and exchange of technologies. The Digital Solution Center, I mentioned, is designed to solve this issue. If not completely, then at least to become a neutral platform for cooperation between the countries in the digital sphere. Your Excellency, would you have advice on how digital solutions can be scaled up multinationally, and how ESCAP as a regional intergovernmental commission could help bring economies to scale and the adoption of digital solutions for sustainable development? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And, I know you had a meeting, I think last week in Kazakhstan about these issues, and congratulations on that. I don't suppose many people have been to Kazakhstan. It's a very big country, and it's very cold in winter. I know that because I made the mistake when I was in Kazakhstan in January, and the sun was shining, and I thought I'd go for a walk outside. I got about 200 yards down the road, and I thought my ears were going to drop off. It was so cold. Anyway, that's by the by and irrelevant. So let me come to your question. Yeah. There is a huge, there is a huge opportunity for regional cooperation on this. Because let's be clear, some of what the digital infrastructure is going to require is a lot of data center capacity, a lot of energy, as we were talking about. And it's not sensible for countries not to cooperate in doing this on a regional basis. And, you know, there's lots of protections that you can put in place that mean that people's data is properly safeguarded country by country. But there's no sense in, you know, countries replicating infrastructure that they could usefully share, or expertise that, frankly, some of the smaller countries are not going to have the opportunity to have. So I think what you're suggesting is very, very sensible. You know, I think, again, certainly in the context we work in Africa, you've often got groups of small countries that could be working together and work regionally. And, you know, this also gives me the opportunity to share applications of the technology and to learn from each other and how that technology is applied most successfully. For example, there are fascinating things happening in terms of education and, you know, interactive education. I mean, generative AI will give the possibility, as it develops, of really quite sophisticated AI tutors. You know, I've already, in the US a few months ago, I saw the AI nurse in operation. And I mean, it's, you know, and this is only just at the beginning of the development of these technologies, but they offer the possibility of really quite revolutionary things happening. And it's going to be much easier for one country to develop that in conjunction with others than for every country to do their own thing. So I think that's a very good initiative, yeah.
Mr. Blair, thank you so much for your very insightful conversation today and all the information you've shared with us. And it's 1:30 and we have to wrap up because we're on a very tight schedule. So that brings our event to a close. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much.